In the summer of 2022, something happened on the battlefields of eastern Ukraine that military analysts had theorized about for decades, but never witnessed at this scale. A weapons system destroyed 18 Russian ammunition depots in less than 3 weeks. Not one, not three, 18. Depots that had taken months to build, filled with tens of thousands of artillery shells, gone in single strikes. Russian artillery batteries that had been pounding Ukrainian positions for months suddenly went silent. Not because they retreated, not because they ran out of will to fight. They ran out of shells to fire, because everything they had stored within range was burning. That system was the M142 High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, HIMARS. And what happened in those 3 weeks in Ukraine rewrote the textbook on how modern armies break each other before infantry ever moves. This is not a story about a rocket launcher.
It is a story about a concept called deep fires, and how the United States spent 30 years building a system precise enough to make that concept work at scale. It is also a story about what the leaked internal assessments, the declassified after-action reports, and the field data coming out of Ukraine actually show, and why military commanders from Berlin to Beijing have been quietly rethinking their logistics doctrine ever since. Before you can understand why HIMARS changes battles, you need to understand what logistics actually means in a conventional war. Most people picture warfare as 2 armies shooting at each other. In reality, a modern army is less like a fist and more like a body. The soldiers at the front are the hand, but behind them, often hundreds of kilometers behind them, there is a circulatory system of fuel trucks, ammunition convoys, repair depots, command nodes, and communication hubs. Cut off the circulation, and the hand stops working no matter how strong it is.
This is not a new idea. Every serious military thinker from Napoleon to Rommel understood it. But for most of military history, cutting that circulatory system was extremely difficult. Artillery reached only a few kilometers. Aircraft could reach further but needed airfields and were vulnerable to air defenses. Special forces could raid supply lines, but not at the volume needed to meaningfully degrade a large force. The problem at its core was range combined with precision, combined with responsiveness. You needed a system that could reach far enough to hit the logistics infrastructure behind the front line, accurately enough to hit the right building at the right coordinates, and fast enough to strike before the target moved or dispersed. For most of the 20th century, no ground-based system could do all 3 at once. HIMARS was designed and built to solve that. The system looks deceptively simple. A single launcher mounted on a 5-ton wheeled truck.
The launcher holds 1 pod of 6 rockets, or 1 pod carrying a single Army tactical missile system round, known as ATACMS. The crew is 3 soldiers. The whole system fits inside a C-130, meaning it can be flown into a theater quickly without heavy airlift. But the simplicity of the vehicle masks the complexity of what it can do. The rocket's HIMARS fires are GPS and inertial navigation-guided munitions with a circular error probable, meaning average miss distance, of less than 5 meters. To put that in context, Soviet-era artillery systems that Russian forces still use in large numbers have a circular error probable of anywhere from 50 to 200 meters. HIMARS is 10 to 40 times more accurate than what it is designed to suppress. That accuracy changes everything about how you use artillery. When your accuracy is measured in hundreds of meters, you compensate by firing massive volumes. Russian artillery doctrine, inherited from the Soviet model, relies on saturation.
You put so many rounds on a grid square that you destroy whatever is there regardless of exactly where each round lands. That requires enormous stockpiles. It requires constant resupply. It means you need those ammunition depots close enough to the front line to keep the guns fed. And those depots, sitting full of shells, become exactly the kind of target that HIMARS was designed to kill. When your accuracy is under 5 meters, the equation flips entirely. You do not need to saturate. You need one round aimed precisely at the building where the ammunition is stored. You do not need massive stockpiles because you are not wasting rounds. And because you are not wasting rounds, the logistics chain supporting HIMARS itself is far leaner than what it is suppressing. A NATO working group assessment from late 2022, portions of which were later reported by several defense publications, described this asymmetry using a term that has since entered the broader defense conversation. They called it fire's efficiency ratio. The working group calculated that each HIMARS rocket expended destroyed equipment worth between 40 and 200 times the cost of the rocket. The wide range reflects variability in what was hit. When a single rocket struck a depot storing 10,000 artillery shells, the ratio was enormous. Across the full period studied, the average return was consistently above 50 to 1. That ratio is why the United States has invested heavily in precision munitions, despite their higher unit cost. A GMLRS rocket costs approximately $110,000 per round at current procurement figures. That sounds expensive compared to a standard artillery shell. But if that one rocket destroys a depot that cost the adversary $15 million to build and 6 months to position, the math is not close. The range of HIMARS is the other half of the equation. The standard GMLRS rocket reaches approximately 70 kilometers. The extended range variant pushes to approximately 150 kilometers. ATACMS reaches up to 300 kilometers, depending on the specific variant. The Precision Strike Missile, the next generation replacement currently in production, is designed to reach 500 kilometers. What that range means tactically is that HIMARS can strike targets 50, 100, even 200 kilometers behind the front line from a firing position that is itself 50 kilometers or more behind friendly lines. That reach extends far beyond what traditional artillery can threaten, and it forces any opposing commander to think about security and dispersal across an enormous geographic area. The Ukrainian military understood this immediately. Their targeting prioritized what planners call high payoff targets: ammunition storage points, fuel depots, command nodes, and bridge crossings that Russian logistics depended on. Within weeks of the first HIMARS systems becoming operational in June 2022, the effect was visible in satellite imagery. Crater patterns and burn scars appeared at known Russian logistics sites far behind the contact line. Russian supply patterns began changing. Depots moved further back, column spacing increased, resupply schedules became erratic. The behavioral change was itself significant data. When an adversary changes how they operate in response to a system, the system is working. Russian artillery output, measured by analysts tracking sound signatures and crater analysis, dropped noticeably in the weeks following HIMARS strikes on key depots. Not because Russian artillery units wanted to fire less, because they had less to fire. The range also creates what defense planners call the dilemma of dispersal. To protect ammunition from HIMARS, you move it further back and spread it across more locations.
But moving it further back makes resupply of frontline guns slower and more complex.
Spreading it across more locations requires more trucks, more security, more coordination. Every adaptation to survive HIMARS makes your logistics less efficient. Every attempt to maintain artillery output under that constraint pushes your supply chain harder. This is the battle HIMARS is actually fighting. Not measured in direct kills, but in logistics degradation over time. And it is a battle that begins before a single infantry soldier moves toward an objective. The firing sequence is worth understanding because the speed of the system is part of what makes it so difficult to counter. An M142 crew can move from road march to firing position in under 5 minutes. From a cold start, the system can be ready to launch in approximately 40 seconds with a trained crew. After firing, standard doctrine is to immediately relocate. The military calls this shoot and scoot.
The reason is counter-battery radar. Every major modern army fields radar designed to track incoming rockets back to their launch point and direct counterfire onto that position. The window between launch detection and counter-battery fire arriving is typically 3 to 5 minutes. HIMARS is designed to be gone before that window closes. The wheeled platform is a key enabler. Tracked artillery like the M109 Paladin moves at roughly 30 kilometers per hour across country. The HIMARS truck moves at 90 kilometers per hour on roads. After firing, a crew can be kilometers away before counter-battery fire arrives. Ukrainian crews operating HIMARS reportedly achieved near-zero losses from counterfire through disciplined shoot-and-scoot execution, per assessments cited by the Institute for the Study of War. The system's survival record in Ukraine stood in stark contrast to virtually every other platform in that conflict. Tanks were lost in large numbers. Infantry vehicles were destroyed by the dozen. HIMARS losses remained minimal, a direct result of mobility doctrine and the ability to strike from positions far enough behind the line. That record has shaped how the U.S. Army thinks about deploying the system in future high-intensity conflict. Understanding how HIMARS works operationally is one thing. Understanding why it represents a generational shift in ground-based fires requires looking at what came before it, what peer adversaries have built in response, and where the technology is heading over the next decade. The lineage of HIMARS goes back to the M270 multiple launch rocket system, which entered U.S. Army service in 1983. The M270 was a tracked vehicle carrying 2 pods, each holding 6 rockets for a total of 12 rounds before reload. It was a powerful system, but it had limitations that became increasingly clear as the Army's operational concepts evolved. The tracked chassis was heavy, limiting strategic mobility. It could not fit in a C-130. Moving an M270 battery into a theater required significant airlift or sea lift. In a world where the U.S. military was increasingly focused on rapid deployment and power projection, that weight was a liability. HIMARS was developed in the 1990s as a lighter, more deployable alternative. The Army accepted the trade-off of carrying half the rockets per vehicle in exchange for a platform that could move faster, deploy more quickly, and operate across a wider range of terrain and infrastructure. The wheeled truck can use standard roads that would be impassable for a tracked system. It requires less maintenance. It consumes less fuel per kilometer. For a military that values strategic mobility as a core capability, those trade-offs made sense. Critically, HIMARS and the M270 fire the same family of munitions. Any rocket or missile that fits in the M270's pods fits in HIMARS. That means the entire investment the U.S. has made in developing precision rocket munitions over 4 decades is available to both systems. It also means that HIMARS inherited a fully mature logistics and maintenance infrastructure the day it entered service, a significant advantage when fielding a new platform. Now, look at what Russia built in the same general category. The BM-30 Smerch is Russia's heavy multiple rocket launcher, capable of firing 300mm rockets to ranges of up to 90 kilometers. It is a formidable system in terms of payload, capable of carrying submunitions, thermobaric warheads, and mine-dispensing rounds. The Smerch can devastate large areas, but its circular error probable is measured in tens of meters at best, not single meters. It is fundamentally a saturation weapon,
built on the same doctrinal logic that HIMARS is specifically designed to exploit.
Russia also fields the Iskander system, a short-range ballistic and cruise missile platform that is far more precise than the Smerch and overlaps conceptually with ATACMS at the higher end of the range spectrum. The Iskander-M ballistic variant has a reported circular error probable of around 5 meters, comparable to GMLRS. Its range is approximately 500 kilometers. On paper, these capabilities are serious. But the Iskander is a different class of system, more expensive per round, produced in lower quantities, and optimized for different target sets than the bread-and-butter logistics interdiction role, where HIMARS has demonstrated its value. The gap that matters most is not peak capability. It is the volume of precision fires each side can sustain. The United States has invested in the industrial base, stockpiles, and targeting infrastructure to employ precision rockets at scale. Russia's precision fires capability is concentrated in fewer, more expensive systems with shallower guided munitions stockpiles. That gap became visible in Ukraine. Russian forces used Iskander missiles extensively, but cost and stockpile limits meant they were reserved for high-value targets. The workhorse of Russian fire support remained unguided artillery, which required the logistics tail that HIMARS was systematically dismantling. China has watched the Ukraine conflict with intense interest. The People's Liberation Army has invested heavily in its own rocket artillery. The PHL-191 fires guided rockets with ranges extending to 300 kilometers and beyond, with specifications that, on paper, rival GMLRS in accuracy. What military analysts in Washington have been studying is not whether China can build a competitive system technically. The evidence from the PHL-191 program makes clear that they can. The question is whether China has built the targeting architecture, the battle damage assessment capability, and the command and control integration needed to employ it effectively at scale. Precision rockets without precision targeting are not precision weapons. They are expensive ways to miss accurately. The targeting chain, from sensor to shooter, is where the United States has the deepest institutional advantage, and it is the advantage that is hardest to replicate quickly. The HIMARS export story is itself a data point worth examining. As of 2024, the United States has sold or committed HIMARS systems to Romania, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Taiwan, Morocco, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. NATO's eastern flank countries are using HIMARS to create deep fires capability that complicates Russian planning. Taiwan's acquisition, announced in 2022, was explicitly framed around anti-access and area denial. Even a smaller force equipped with precise long-range fires can impose unacceptable costs on a larger invading force. That framing reflects a broader shift in deterrence thinking. During the Cold War, deterrence meant large armored formations in Central Europe. Today, it means distributing precision fires among allies so any adversary has to account for threats across an entire theater, not just from a single U.S. force concentration. The munitions development pipeline feeding into HIMARS and its successors is where the next chapter is being written. The Army's Precision Strike Missile, PRSM, completed developmental testing and began fielding in 2023. It replaces older ATACMS variants, nearly doubles the range, and reduces radar signature. A future variant is designed to exceed 1,000 kilometers, pushing into territory currently occupied only by cruise missiles. The Army is also developing what it calls long-range hypersonic weapon, which will eventually fire from a modified HIMARS-compatible launcher. Hypersonic munitions travel at speeds above Mach 5, which compresses the decision cycle available to any air defense system trying to intercept them. A conventional GMLRS rocket
travels at roughly Mach 3 at peak velocity. A hypersonic round at Mach 8 or above gives air defense operators a fraction of the intercept window. When that hypersonic capability is paired with the HIMARS shoot and scoot mobility, the combination presents a different order of challenge for any adversary trying to protect fixed logistics infrastructure. The counter-HIMARS problem is something every peer military is now actively working on. Russia developed its own countermeasures during the Ukraine conflict, primarily through electromagnetic warfare systems designed to jam or spoof GPS signals used by GMLRS rockets.
There are documented cases of GPS jamming degrading precision strikes in certain areas. The U.S. response has been to add inertial navigation backup systems, making the rockets harder to defeat through GPS jamming alone. This cat-and-mouse dynamic between precision munitions and electronic countermeasures is ongoing and is one of the principal drivers of munitions development investment on both sides. The broader lesson from Ukraine is not that HIMARS is invincible. The lesson is about operational design. HIMARS succeeded because it was used correctly against the right targets at the right phase of the campaign. The Ukrainians prioritized logistics infrastructure over direct fire support. They preserved the system for deep fires rather than burning rocket inventory on targets shorter-range systems could handle. That operational discipline is a force multiplier technology alone cannot provide. Several defense analysts reviewing the Ukraine data have pointed to a metric that rarely appears in public coverage: the ratio of Ukrainian offensive gain per kilometer of front versus Russian logistics capacity in affected sectors. In the periods following major HIMARS strikes on logistics nodes, Ukrainian infantry advanced in areas that had been static for months. The correlation is not perfect because war never is, but the pattern is consistent enough that it has become a primary exhibit in the argument that deep fires is not a support function. It is a decisive operation in its own right. The U.S. Army's multi-domain operations doctrine, which replaced air-land battle, explicitly treats long-range precision fires as a primary tool for creating windows of advantage. Artillery is not there to support infantry. It is there to degrade the adversary's ability to fight at all, opening the door through which infantry, armor, and aviation then move. What the operational data from Ukraine has confirmed, and what the leaked assessments have been saying internally for years, is that this concept works. It works at scale. It works against a peer adversary with sophisticated counter-battery capabilities. And it works with a system that costs a fraction of what a comparable air campaign would require. The United States built HIMARS to end battles before they fully begin, and built the doctrine around it to make sure that capability is used. Not through shock and awe, not through mass, but through systematic precision applied against the infrastructure that makes sustained combat possible. What the battlefields of eastern Ukraine showed the world is that the theory was right. A force that can reach deep, strike precisely, survive counterfire, and sustain that pressure over weeks and months does not just win engagements. It dismantles the opponent's ability to fight.
And by the time the infantry moves, the battle has already been decided in the supply depots that are no longer there.